ESPN's highest paid personality sounded off about the collapse of DEI initiatives in America. Here's what Mr. Smith had to say.
Because when you handle it the way that the Trump administration is handling it, we want the most qualified, we want the smartest, we want this, we want that. What you're really saying is, we want white dominance again. That's what you're really saying. You want white dominance. Because if you're pointing to DEI, and that's usually pointed towards quote unquote unqualified minorities, because you're always using the word qualified, as if everybody that got a position through DEI is not qualified. We know what you're implying. We know what you're insinuating. And you got folks in the administration, and Pete Hegseth, oh my God, the nerve of him to just join into the fray and give his quote about making sure qualified people have these jobs. You're the defense secretary, whose only job prior to this was as a weekend host on Fox News.
Mr. Smith, I hear you in your frustration, even though I don't agree with you. You say that opposing and dismantling DEI policies will lead to white dominance. But I'd like to know specifically how so, in what ways? How does that work exactly? Furthermore, the assumption that you need to believe in order to justify something like a DEI policy is that the quote unquote oppressed individual is not capable of competing on a level playing field. Therefore, the playing field must be advantaged towards said oppressed people. But isn't that just the same thing as white dominance with a different set of dominant people? And more than that, is it not a tragically low view of entire people groups to assume that because of their skin color or nationality or whatever, that they can't compete in a consistent environment? I, for one, reject that entirely, because to accept that is to say that I can't compete on a level playing field without stacking the deck in my favor simply because my skin is a little darker than someone else's. And I kind of feel sorry for you, because that's one of the most depressing and nihilistic views of humanity and worldview that one can hold. No wonder I'd be upset if that's how I saw the world too. But this kind of worldview has no room for merit or equal treatment of others or any of the other things we preach about. It just swings back and forth from one power group to another. How is that justice? How is that freedom? How is that loving your compassion? It isn't. And not only that, but why don't we apply the same DEI policies everywhere? Because we don't apply them everywhere. We only apply them where it's politically convenient. Why don't we apply them to sports? Where is the DEI in the NFL on the football team for the players? They have pro days. They have the when we go through the draft, the draft is coming up for the NFL. How many of those first round draft picks are DEI draft picks? Because we got to even the playing field for whatever oppressed person we're not seeing. No, it's based on can they play the sport? Who's the best available player? Why is that okay in the NFL but nowhere else? Why is that okay in the NBA or Major League Baseball but nowhere else? Or what about in broadcasting? Mr. Smith, whose job did you take? What oppressed person should be sitting in your seat? Whose money are you taking because the white man in his power and oppressive authority decided to give it to you instead of someone more deserving? It would appear to me that beyond DEI hiring not being based on merit or ability to actually do the job, it's also yet another power-grabbing grift that preys on vulnerable people and uses them for good press and as political covers, while the powers that be take more power and liberty for you and me. An NBC Washington report found that DEI funding for public education alone, just one sector, has reached the $1 billion mark, and that's just during the Biden administration, and it continues to climb. Just in education. DEI funding is all over America, in America's healthcare system, in part of our corporations, clearly. That's why the corporations like Costco are clinging to it. And of course, part of America's own government. DEI is an industry like any other. And it's an industry where those in power spend money to collect more power. That's what it is. It doesn't advance anyone or anything. But we need to understand that when the industry is funded by our tax dollars, i.e. the government, that government is not spending money to advance our freedoms because our freedoms stand against their power. DEI is another in a long line of government grifts to make us all equally miserable and equally under its iron-fisted authority. The DEI's mission is to prove to you that you can't do it, that you can't make it, and then pick a reason why. Your skin color, your gender, who you are attracted to, on and on and on. What neighborhood you come out of, that's why you can't make it. No one can make it ever. You're all losers. You're all too stupid to figure this out. That's why DEI has to convince some people that they'll never make it while blaming everything wrong that has ever happened in the world on the straight, white, Christian, conservative male. Tell me I'm wrong. And that's only if they're willing to admit there is a gender called male, unless that violates DEI principles. And Mr. Smith, I really hope that you don't fall for this grift. I mean, you, a black man, right? You're the highest paid on-camera talent at the nation's largest sports and entertainment network. Doesn't your own success prove that DEI has nothing to do with individual achievement or success? Because otherwise, you'd have to be a DEI hire too. I don't think that's the case. You are much more than the color of your skin. I would hope you know that. And for that matter, so is everyone. And yes, racists exist in the world, but those racists did not stop you from reaching the heights that no other sportscaster has ever seen, because there you are in your chair. And the worst thing we can do is to decry so-called systemic racism only to replace the system with our preferred form of racism. I want to welcome back R.C. Williams and Julianna Ormond from Watchmen Action. Your response.
Wow. Where do we even start to unravel that thing? This is the balance of meritocracy, Andrew, in all honesty, right? I think that any of us, professionally speaking, we run a business, we have a ministry, you run a business, right? You're a TV show host. We would much rather be judged on our work and our capability than something else. And so if you think through what you just shared with us in this segment, and you wonder to yourself, when you go to a particular place or you choose to buy a particular product or service, why you find yourself saying, why does everything suck? Why is the service bad? Why is it so dirty? And why all this stuff? You can thank DEI practices for that, because as you said, they are designed to make everyone equally miserable, not to get people focused on excelling and providing exemplary service because you're rewarded based on your merit and your talent and your ability versus the color of your skin or even your gender.
And now we have a crisis with the young white men because they are not thriving. They're not moving forward. Like I was listening to a podcast and they were talking about the stats of how this DEI really has impacted, the white young men in our culture. That's, racism. And people don't want to talk about it. They say racism only is from white people to black people. I'm sorry. Racism goes all the way around to all different people and whatnot, okay? Because I get really bad looks from black women when I'm with my husband, right? And you can see why. So racism is systemic. It's all over the place. It goes everywhere.
And Andrew, I'd add on to that. If you want to see some real racism, Stephen A. Smith, go talk to a black African. They don't like you. A real black African, they do not like you. They are not quiet about their disdain for black Americans because, ding, 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 guess what? They're lazy and entitled, and all they do is run their mouth about what they don't have.
The victim mentality, the society, the culture of covetousness certainly is rampant. I wrote a book about this called More Than Reconciliation. Nobody cared. But I think it's because the message of it was, listen, racism are these things that we're decrying. It's a sin problem, which we know about, but nobody wants to admit that. They want to think that if we can get a government program and spend enough money and put the right avatar on our Facebook page and have the right Twitter handle and all this kind of stuff, that it'll just magically, go away, or at least I've done my part, quote unquote. Instead of getting at the heart of the matter and the spiritual problem, which is I want a reason to dislike or mistreat someone else, and racism is as good as any, but there can be any reason. The problem is sin, but we don't want to accept that. Because if we do accept that, then we can't keep blaming the white man for it, because to blame the white man is also sinful. To blame X, Y, or Z is also sinful. To vilify and demonize people groups in order to in effect, or in order to in the press appear to be lifting up a people group is sinful, because it's fraud. The whole thing is fraud. And again, as we talked about, it's grabbing power, it's controlling corporations. And then we see that today, because it's, for some corporations, it's more profitable. DEI is more profitable than not. For others, the juice isn't worth the squeeze. And so you see those companies back away from it. But it is interesting to see how our culture really is beginning to line up. And I mean Western culture. So this goes beyond America's borders, I'm afraid, because we are slipping into globalism quicker and quicker, but how we are lining up into this oppressor and oppressed mindset. And then there's that third group, which I think we're in. We're like, no, that's not it at all. And either way, and which one of these groups is going to quote unquote have enough power to either sustain a new dawn of freedom and liberty, or to march into the next stage of tyranny that we have yet to see. I'll give you guys the last word in this segment.
I'm going to say that Father says there's only two people groups, one that is for him and then one that is against him. That's the only way that we should be divided. Okay? We are for the Father, and what the Father says that should be happening here on earth. Okay? And the only people that are against us are those that are against him. Outside of that, we're not divided because of skin color or even by sex. We're all here for a reason to do what Father says that we're supposed to be doing. That's the only people groups that we should be involved with.